Right, good morning, welcome back. Now this is the fourth of 4 videos relating to the valve clearances on the XJR. Now the first one, we covered how to check the clearances. And if you're lucky and they're all within spec, you can put the cap back on and go ride your bike. But ours were not, we needed to change all of them. So in the second video, I showed you how to physically change them using that little fork tool so you don't have to take the cams out. Excellent. In the third video, the last one, I showed you how to determine the size of the replacement shim that you need in order to get that clearance correct. And today, all those shims are now here. I've ordered them, they've arrived, and I'll show you how to fit them in the bike. Let's go. $275. Numbers always face downwards so the cam lobe doesn't wear them off. $281. Lovely. Right, there we are, first one in, and this is where you get your first challenge. Roll the engine around a few times to seat the new shims in their place nice and firmly so they're not sitting on a bed of oil or anything. Make sure when you put the assembly lube on your shims, you don't have to use that, you can use clean engine oil, but make sure you don't put too much because you don't want the shim to be held up above where it should be. You want it to be settled right down in, but at the same time, you can't afford for it to be dry because it can gall up the surface of your cam. Anyway, you know all that. This is where you'll get your first challenge. Your feeler gauges will go up in size in increments of 0.05 of a millimetre. Tolerance is 0.11 to 0.15. Now I've got a 0.15. Let's see if that fits. It does, but it's a bit tight. So let's try the 0.10. Now remember, if this is tight, it's under tolerance, and I've made it too tight. And no, the 0.10 slides in easily. Now the tolerance should feel like a knife going into cheese. It should be slightly tight. And as that's not, it's a bit loose, I reckon I can estimate I've got about a 0.12 or 0.13, which is bang in the middle of the tolerance. So inlet number 1, perfect. 7 more to do. Okay, notch to the front so you can get the shim out. Sometimes these notches, when you rotate them to the front to get yourself access to them, pushing the lobe down on top can glide them round. The oil residue, as it squeezes out of the way, they can rotate out of range. So just get a little screwdriver and hold them in place as you push the lobe down to push them out of the way. And this reminds me, somebody asked in the comments, as you're holding the 2 valves down with this little lock tool, when you rotate the engine back to lift those lobes out of the way, is the piston not coming up and hitting the valves? The answer to that is no, because if you watch closely, as I demonstrate in a second, when you rotate the cam back, the tool is actually a little bit above those buckets, and they are allowed to come up very slightly before they lock and stop to give you the required gap to get the shim out. And they come up just enough that make sure, as long as you only bring those lobes up about 45 degrees and no further, then the piston won't come up and touch the valves. It's quite safe. That tool is a Yamaha design tool. This is designed to work this way, so it's quite safe. As you can see, as I rotate the lobe back, you see that bucket there actually comes up quite a bit there, out of harm's way before it locks. As long as you stop about there with the lobe and don't come around any further, it's absolutely fine. That's that one. 274. See if it actually is a 274. There it is, bang on, 274. Correct. And my tolerance is 0.10. That needs to be 0.15. So as a 274, remove 0.5 gives me 269. Can't get a 269, so a 270 will do the job. A 270. Boom. 270. Assembly loop. Just the tiniest little smear. Just literally a wipe, nothing more. There. 265 in this one. Yep. Tiniest little smear, just a residue. Yep. There it is. Boom. Nice. 015. 015. So, number 2 inlet, both of them are at the top of the spec. Perfect. J2. Yep. Perfect. Here's a perfect example of a shim with no numbers on it at all, no markings whatsoever, not even on the sides, which is why it's critical to do this job. You need a micrometer, and this one measures 284. There it is. Right, inlet target 0.11 to 0.15. 0.15. Nice, that's correct. Little tight, but that's correct. Nice and tight. So both of those are right bang on in the middle, in between the spec. another blank one, no numbers, and it measures 285. Right, exhaust side, target between 0.16 and 0.20. There's a 0.20 feeler gauge. Oh, perfect. Absolutely perfect. And the other one, it's a little bit tighter, but it goes in. So they are both within spec. There we go. Now 0.20, that's top of the tolerance. That doesn't go in, so they're not too big. 0.15, that's just under tolerance. Should be 0.16 minimum, and that falls in. So we are somewhere around 0.17, 0.18, which is absolutely bang on. Right, there we are. Now that's a few hours work. Take your time. You can't be too meticulous with a job like this. Some manuals say to turn the engine over 10 times to seat those shims right down into the buckets before you finally check the clearances. Well, I don't know whether 10 times is necessarily, but certainly several times to make sure that those shims aren't sitting up at all and that your clearances are wrong. And I've been through those at least twice now, and they're all absolutely now within spec, so I'm very happy. Now, a couple of things that are critically important. First of all, when you're flipping the shims out of their buckets on the innermost lobes, the ones that are right next to the cam sprockets, be so careful that that shim doesn't jump out of its bucket and drop down the side of the cam chain and into the bottom of the engine, because as you can imagine, that would spoil your whole morning. Now the next thing that's equally important, you've seen me in all of this series of 4 videos working with tweezers to lift these shims out. Try not to use magnets. It's a temptation when you're retrieving anything in an engine or working situation to use those little magnets that come on a telescopic aerial. How convenient are they? But just think about it for a minute. If you're going to use a magnet on that shim, you will magnetize the shim to a small degree. Not much, but you'll put a certain amount of magnetic force into that shim and it will remain there. And if that then collects any swarf that's going around the engine, in the oil, it will stick to the shim and slowly grind away at the cam lobes. So use tweezers and you won't magnetize the shims. Very important. Now the next thing, quite important, is a micrometer. You're going to need one of some description or other. This is an old analog one. You read the sizes off the drum, and there are so many videos out there in internet land on how to read a micrometer. Don't fret it, it's so easy to do. And you can get a little analog one from as little as 30, 40 pounds, that's easy, or you can treat yourself to a digital one if you want to. I got that because I've had that for 30 years and it's thousandths of an inch. That's an imperial one, and this is a metric and imperial. So you get that if you've got a digital one, you get both. So treat yourself, because out of the 16 shims, 6 of them had no numbers on. So it's critical that you have to measure them, and this is what you need to measure them with. Can't do it without one. Now in the past, like maybe 10 years ago, we'd have made this video in a 45-minute to 1 hour long presentation of the whole job start to finish with the engine running. But these days, the taste for that kind of video has changed. Most people like videos that are 6 to 8 minutes long. So what we've decided to do is load this up as 4 separate bite-sized episodes. In the first one, we showed how to actually measure those clearances and find out what they are. In the second one, I demonstrated how to use this little tool, this little fork tool, to hold down the 2 shim buckets so you can flip the shims out and physically change them without taking the cams out. Dead easy. In the third one was time for mathematics. We showed how to record the data that you found out from your measuring and what size of shims you've got and then what size you need. So how to do that calculation. That's the lion's share of the job. Then you can order all the shims you actually require. And then in the fourth one today, demonstrating literally how to fit all your new shims so all your clearances are exactly correct and you're ready to button it up. So hopefully breaking it down into 4 bite-sized presentations, it makes more sense and it's more interesting to watch than a 1 hour long demonstration that most people skip through the majority of anyway. So as I said at the beginning of the video on the board, this is a visual demonstration for entertainment only. I would urge that you don't attempt this job unless you're completely confident in doing it yourself and bringing it off successfully, because a job like this is money well invested in a professional if you're not sure. Now I'm going to put the cat back on and all the furniture back on off camera. You don't need to watch that, it's boring, you can manage that I'm sure. But I just want to leave a last word to Yambits. Now I couldn't find all the shims when I started looking at random sellers I've used in the past, but Yambits had all of them, had every single shim I needed. They don't guarantee they've always got all the shims, but in this instance they had all 16 in stock and they were here the very next day. So I will leave a link in the description to Yambits if you've got parts you need for any Yamaha, not just an XJR. I'll thank you for watching. Take it easy, ride safe, and I'll see you next time.